The morning air held that crisp bite of autumn, the kind that makes you pull your sweater a little tighter around your shoulders. I remember standing at my kitchen window, steam from my coffee mug fogging the glass as I watched the maple leaves drift down like golden confetti. The house felt so quiet, so peaceful. Michael had already left for his construction job, his heavy work boots echoing through the hallway at 5:30 in the morning like they had for the past 15 years of our marriage. The familiar sound of his truck engine fading down Elm Street was my daily signal that another ordinary day was beginning. How wrong I was. The scent of vanilla candles still lingered from the night before, mixing with the aroma of fresh coffee beans I had ground myself. Our kitchen had always been my sanctuary, with its warm honey-colored cabinets and the little herb garden on the windowsill that caught the morning sun just right. Everything felt so normal, so predictable. The refrigerator hummed its familiar tune, and somewhere upstairs, I could hear the old radiator in our bedroom clicking as it warmed the house against the October chill. I should have known something was wrong when Michael started working those late shifts 3 months ago. Not just occasional overtime, but every single night until well past 9 o'clock. When I asked about it, he would run his calloused fingers through his graying hair and say the same thing every time. Construction season was booming, he explained, his voice carrying that tired edge that made me feel guilty for even questioning it. The new shopping center project was behind schedule, and his crew needed all hands on deck to finish before winter set in. It made sense. Michael had always been a hard worker, the kind of man who took pride in providing for his family. When we married 22 years ago, he promised me I would never have to worry about money, and he had kept that promise. Our 3-bedroom colonial house was paid off, our daughter Sarah was halfway through her junior year at State University, and we had enough saved for a comfortable retirement. At least, that is what I believed. The first crack in my perfect little world appeared on a Tuesday morning in late October. I was sorting through the mail, sitting at our oak dining table with its familiar scratches from years of family dinners and homework sessions. Bills, advertisements, and the usual collection of catalogs scattered across the polished surface. Then I found it, buried between a credit card offer and our electric bill. A bank statement from First National, addressed to Michael James Harrison, my husband of 22 years. The strange thing was, we banked at Community Trust. We had always banked at Community Trust, ever since we bought this house back in 2001. I held the envelope up to the morning light streaming through our lace curtains, my heart beginning to beat just a little faster. The paper felt crisp and official between my fingers, and something cold settled in the pit of my stomach. I should not have opened it. That is what any rational person would say. But sitting there in the quiet of our dining room, with the grandfather clock in the corner ticking away the seconds and the faint smell of Michael's coffee still hanging in the air, rationality was not what I was feeling. My hands trembled slightly as I slid my finger under the sealed flap, the sound of tearing paper unnaturally loud in the silence. The numbers on that statement made my world tilt sideways. 17 transactions in the past month alone, each one for hundreds of dollars. Cash withdrawals from ATMs I had never heard of, in parts of town I rarely visited. Restaurant charges at places Michael and I had never been together. Most disturbing of all were the regular transfers, every Friday for the past 6 months, of exactly $800 to an account holder listed simply as J. Martinez. J. Martinez. The name meant nothing to me, but it was typed there in bold black letters, appearing over and over again like a terrible drumbeat. $800 every single week for 24 weeks. That was almost $20,000 of money I never knew existed, going to someone I had never heard of. My coffee had grown cold while I stared at those numbers, the ceramic mug now room temperature against my palm. The kitchen suddenly felt too quiet, too still. Even the refrigerator had stopped humming, as if the entire house was holding its breath. I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, drowning out the familiar sounds of our neighborhood waking up around me. The rational part of my mind tried to find innocent explanations. Maybe J. Martinez was a business partner. Maybe Michael was investing in some side project and wanted to surprise me with the profits. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for all of this, and I was worrying over nothing. But deep in my gut, in that place where wives always know the truth even when they do not want to, I knew this was something else entirely. I spent the rest of that Tuesday in a fog, going through the motions of my daily routine while my mind churned over those bank statements. I taught my 4th grade class, graded spelling tests, attended a parent conference, and even stopped by the grocery store on my way home. But through it all, that cold feeling in my stomach never went away. Every smile felt forced, every word I spoke sounded hollow in my own ears. When Michael came home that night, the sound of his key in the front door made me jump. I was sitting on our navy blue sofa, pretending to grade papers while the bank statement lay hidden beneath my lesson plan book. The familiar creak of the hardwood floors under his work boots should have been comforting, but instead it made my pulse quicken with anxiety. He looked tired, the way he always did after a long day on the construction site. His flannel shirt was dusty with sawdust, and there were dark circles under his brown eyes. When he leaned down to kiss my forehead, I caught the scent of his cologne mixed with the outdoor smell of fresh lumber and autumn air. It was the same scent I had loved for over 2 decades, but tonight it made me feel sick to my stomach. We had dinner together at our kitchen table, the way we had thousands of times before. Michael told me about a problem with the concrete delivery, and I shared a funny story about one of my students. The conversation flowed normally, comfortably, just like always. But underneath it all, I could feel that bank statement burning through my lesson plan book in the living room, its presence poisoning every word between us. I waited until Thursday to confront him. 2 days of carrying this secret had worn me down, leaving me exhausted and jumpy. I kept catching myself staring at him during dinner, searching his face for signs of deception, analyzing every word he spoke for hidden meanings. He noticed, of course. After 22 years of marriage, couples develop a radar for when something is off. On Thursday evening, he cornered me in our bedroom while I was folding laundry. The familiar domestic task felt surreal as he sat on the edge of our queen-sized bed, his weight making the mattress dip slightly. Our bedroom had always been our private refuge, with its soft blue walls and the wedding photo on my dresser showing 2 young people who thought they knew what forever meant. His voice was gentle when he asked if everything was okay, but I could hear the worry underneath. He reached out to touch my hand, his fingers rough from years of construction work, and the contact sent a jolt of guilt and anger through me. How could those same hands that had held me through 22 years of marriage be signing checks to some mysterious J. Martinez? I could not find the words at first. How do you ask your husband of over 2 decades if he is hiding money from you? How do you accuse the man you love of lying without sounding paranoid or controlling? So I started with something safer, something that had been bothering me for weeks. The late nights, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The construction project that never seemed to end. The way he came home smelling like someone else's perfume, though I had told myself it was just the scent of cleaning supplies from whatever building he was working on. Michael's face went through a series of expressions so quickly I almost missed them. Surprise, then confusion, then something that looked almost like relief. He explained about the project again, more details this time about difficult clients and change orders and the pressure from his supervisor to get everything finished before the first snow. His voice sounded sincere, tired but honest, and for a moment I wanted to believe him. But then I thought about those bank statements hidden in my lesson plan book, and the coldness in my stomach returned. So I asked the question that had been haunting me for 2 days. I asked about Jade Martinez. The change in Michael was instant and unmistakable. The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. His hands, which had been gesturing as he talked about work, went completely still. Even his breathing seemed to stop for several long seconds. The silence in our bedroom was deafening, broken only by the sound of our old heating system clicking on in the basement. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Smaller somehow, like a child caught in a lie. He tried to explain, stumbling over words that did not make sense. Jade Martinez was a business contact, he said. Someone who supplied materials at a discount. The transfers were for bulk purchases that saved the company money, and Michael got a commission for setting up the deals. But even as he spoke, I could see the lie in his eyes. After 22 years of marriage, you learn to read every expression, every subtle shift in tone. Michael was lying to me, and we both knew it. The man I had trusted with my heart, my home, and my future was sitting on our marriage bed telling me elaborate stories while $800 of our money disappeared every week to some stranger named J. Martinez. That night, I lay awake listening to Michael's breathing beside me, the same steady rhythm that had lulled me to sleep for over 2 decades. but now it sounded different, like a stranger's breath in my bed. The familiar weight of his body on the mattress, the warmth radiating from his skin, even the subtle scent of his shampoo on the pillowcase, everything that had once brought me comfort now felt foreign and threatening. I made a decision sometime around 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling while moonlight filtered through our bedroom curtains. I was going to find out who Jay Martinez was, and I was going to discover exactly what my husband was hiding from me. I had no idea that decision would lead me down a path that would destroy everything I thought I knew about my life. Continua a historia. The next morning, Michael left for work at his usual time, his heavy boots echoing through our hallway as if nothing had changed. I waited until I heard his truck disappear down the street before I called in sick to school. The lie came easily, too easily, and I realized I was already becoming someone I did not recognize. But I could not sit in my classroom and teach children about honesty while my own world was built on deception. I spent that Friday morning going through every piece of paper in our house. Bank statements, tax returns, insurance documents, anything that might give me a clue about what Michael was hiding. Our home office was tucked into what used to be Sarah's bedroom before she left for college, and it still smelled faintly of her vanilla body spray and the lavender sachets she used to keep in her dresser drawers. The familiar space felt different now, like I was trespassing in my own home. Every drawer I opened, every file I examined, felt like a betrayal of the trust that had defined our marriage. But the betrayal, I was beginning to understand, had started long before I began looking through his papers. In the bottom drawer of our filing cabinet, hidden beneath old warranty documents and instruction manuals, I found what I was looking for. More bank statements, dating back almost 2 years. The First National account had been active much longer than I had realized, and the pattern of withdrawals and transfers painted a picture that made my hands shake as I read. The $800 weekly transfers to Jay Martinez had been going on for 96 weeks. Almost 2 years of secret payments, totaling over $76,000. But that was not the worst part. Mixed in with the transfers were charges that told a story I did not want to believe. Hotel rooms at the Marriott downtown. Expensive dinners at Romano's, the Italian restaurant where Michael had taken me for our anniversary just 3 years ago. Jewelry purchases from Tiffany & Company, charges that definitely had not resulted in gifts for me. My husband was not just hiding money from me. He was living an entire secret life, and someone named Jay Martinez was at the center of it. I called the bank from our kitchen phone, my voice shaking as I tried to sound casual. The customer service representative was friendly but firm about privacy policies. They could not give me any information about account holders without proper authorization. But something in my voice must have conveyed my desperation, because the young woman on the other end of the line paused before offering one small piece of information. Jay Martinez was not a business account, she said gently. It was a personal checking account held by an individual. She could not tell me anything else, but that was enough. Michael had been sending $800 every week for almost 2 years to a woman. The phone felt heavy in my hand as I hung up, and I had to sit down at our kitchen table before my legs gave out completely. Our familiar kitchen, with its warm wood cabinets and the little collection of ceramic roosters on the windowsill, suddenly felt like a stage set for a life that had never been real. How many mornings had I stood at this same counter, making coffee for a husband who was living a double life? How many evenings had we sat at this table, sharing our days while he kept an entire world secret from me? I spent the rest of that day in a haze of anger and disbelief. Part of me wanted to confront Michael the moment he walked through the door, to throw those bank statements at his feet and demand the truth. But a larger part of me, the part that had been a teacher for 15 years and understood the importance of having all the facts before making accusations, knew I needed more information. That afternoon, I drove to the address listed on one of the hotel receipts. The Marriott downtown was only 20 minutes from our house, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that catered to business travelers and couples looking for a romantic getaway. I sat in the parking lot for almost an hour, watching people come and go, wondering how many times Michael had walked through those revolving doors with another woman. The valet attendant was a young man with kind eyes who probably saw too much of human nature in his job. When I approached him with a $20 bill and a photo of Michael from our last anniversary dinner, he nodded almost immediately. Yes, he remembered my husband. Not by name, but by the pickup truck and the woman who was always with him. She was pretty, the valet told me, his voice gentle as he seemed to realize what kind of conversation we were having. Latina, probably in her 30s, with long dark hair and a smile that lit up her whole face. She always wore expensive clothes, designer handbags, jewelry that caught the light when she moved. They came to the hotel every Friday afternoon for about 2 years, always requesting the same suite on the 15th floor. Every Friday afternoon. The same day Michael made those $800 transfers to J. Martinez. The drive home passed in a blur of tears and rage. Our neighborhood looked different now, like I was seeing it through someone else's eyes. The houses that had always seemed so permanent and safe now felt fragile, as if all of our lives were just elaborate constructions that could collapse at any moment. Mrs. Peterson was watering her garden as I pulled into our driveway, and she waved with her usual friendly smile. I managed to wave back, wondering if she had any idea that my entire world had just crumbled. That evening, Michael came home at his usual time, his work boots heavy on our front steps. The sound that had once meant comfort and security now made my stomach clench with anxiety. I was in our living room, pretending to read a book while those bank statements lay spread across the coffee table like evidence at a crime scene. When he saw the papers, Michael stopped dead in the doorway. His lunchbox slipped from his fingers and hit the hardwood floor with a metallic crash that seemed to echo through our suddenly silent house. For several long seconds, we just stared at each other across the room that had witnessed 22 years of our life together. The confession came out in pieces, like a dam breaking slowly instead of all at once. Juanita Martinez was a paralegal at the law firm handling his construction company's insurance claims. They had met 2 years ago when Michael had to give a deposition about a workplace accident. She was smart and funny and made him feel young again, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. It started with just coffee after the legal meetings, then lunch, then dinner. Before he knew it, he was in love with someone who was not his wife. The hotel room was their escape, their place away from the complications of real life. The $800 every week was not just for her, Michael explained, his voice breaking. It was for their apartment. Their apartment. The words hit me like a physical blow. My husband had not just been having an affair, he had been building an entire alternate life. Juanita Martinez was not just his mistress, she was his second wife in everything but law. And I, the woman who had shared his bed and his name for over 2 decades, had been reduced to the inconvenient first wife who did not know she was being replaced. The questions poured out of me then, 20 months of lies demanding answers. How long had they been planning to leave me? Did his co-workers know? Had he taken her to places we used to go together? Was he going to ask for a divorce, or was he planning to just disappear one day and leave me to figure it out myself? Michael tried to explain, but every word made it worse. Yes, his supervisor knew about Juanita. Yes, they had been to Romano's together, the same restaurant where we celebrated our anniversary. No, he had not been planning to ask for a divorce because he could not afford to split our assets. The construction business had been slow for the past year, and maintaining 2 households had drained almost all of our savings. That last revelation sent ice through my veins. Our savings account, the one we had built together over 22 years of marriage, was gone. The money we had set aside for retirement, for emergencies, for Sarah's wedding someday, had been spent on hotel rooms and expensive dinners and an apartment for my husband's mistress. I asked to see our real bank statements, the ones from Community Trust where I thought our money was safely deposited. Michael's face went even paler as he reluctantly retrieved them from his hidden files. The numbers told a devastating story. Our savings account, which should have had over $120,000, held just over $8,000. Our checking account was barely positive after the mortgage payment and household expenses. We were, for all practical purposes, broke. 22 years of careful saving and responsible living had been consumed by my husband's double life. The financial security I thought we had built together was as much of an illusion as our happy marriage. That night, I slept in Sarah's old room, surrounded by the remnants of my daughter's childhood. Her bookshelf still held the Nancy Drew mystery she had loved in middle school, and her desk drawer was filled with friendship bracelets and movie ticket stubs from high school dates. The innocence of those artifacts made my situation feel even more surreal. I called my sister Linda the next morning, my voice breaking as I tried to explain what was happening. Linda lived 3 states away, but she was on the road within an hour of hanging up the phone. Having someone in my corner, someone who believed me and supported me, felt like the first good thing that had happened in days. Linda arrived that evening with a suitcase, a box of tissues, and the phone number of the best divorce attorney in the county. Margaret Chen had a reputation for being tough but fair, the kind of lawyer who could navigate the complex financial issues that were about to dominate my life. Linda insisted we call her first thing Monday morning. Margaret Chen's office was located in a gleaming downtown building that smelled of expensive leather and fresh flowers. The reception area was decorated in soothing neutral tones, but nothing could calm the storm of anxiety churning in my stomach as I waited for our appointment. Linda sat beside me, her presence a comforting anchor in a world that had become completely unpredictable. When Margaret finally called us into her office, I was struck by how young she looked. I had expected someone older, more matronly, but Margaret Chen could not have been more than 45. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her gray suit was perfectly tailored. But her eyes were kind, and when she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone who had navigated these treacherous waters many times before. I told her everything, starting with the mysterious bank statement and ending with Michael's confession about the apartment he shared with Juanita Martinez. Margaret listened without interrupting, taking notes on a yellow legal pad in handwriting so neat it could have been typed. Occasionally she would nod or ask a clarifying question, but mostly she just absorbed the details of my crumbling marriage with professional compassion. When I finished, Margaret set down her pen and looked directly at me with an expression that was both sympathetic and determined. What Michael had done, she explained, was called dissipation of marital assets. In our state, any property or money acquired during a marriage belonged equally to both spouses, regardless of who earned it. By secretly spending over $76,000 on his affair, Michael had essentially stolen from me. The legal term for it was financial infidelity, and it was taken very seriously by family court judges. If we could prove the extent of Michael's secret spending, the court would likely award me a larger share of our remaining assets to compensate for what he had hidden. But first, we needed documentation of everything. Margaret assigned a private investigator named Robert Walsh to help gather evidence. Robert was a former police detective who specialized in financial crimes, and he had contacts at banks, credit agencies, and government offices that could help us trace the full extent of Michael's deception. The process would take several weeks, but it was essential if we wanted to recover any of our stolen money. In the meantime, Margaret advised me to open my own bank account and start documenting every penny that came in and went out of our household. She also suggested I change the passwords on all our shared accounts and make copies of every important financial document I could find. The goal was to prevent Michael from hiding or spending any more of our assets while the legal process moved forward. Walking out of that office, I felt simultaneously empowered and terrified. For the first time since discovering those bank statements, I had a plan and professional allies. But I also realized that my marriage was truly over. There would be no working things out, no couples counseling, no second chances. Michael had made his choice when he decided to build a secret life with another woman, and now I had to build a new life for myself. The hardest part was telling Sarah. My daughter was in the middle of midterm exams at college, and the last thing I wanted was to disrupt her studies with our family drama. But she deserved to know the truth, especially since the financial implications would affect her education funding. I drove to State University on a crisp November afternoon, the campus blazing with fall colors that should have been beautiful but just made me feel melancholy. Sarah met me at the student union, her backpack slung over one shoulder and her face bright with the excitement of someone who still believed the world was basically good and fair. We found a quiet corner in the coffee shop, and I tried to find words that would explain how her father had betrayed our family without completely destroying her faith in love and marriage. But there is no gentle way to tell your 20-year-old daughter that her father has been living a double life for 2 years. Sarah's reaction was heartbreaking to watch. First came disbelief, then anger, then a kind of hollow sadness that made her look older than her years. She had always been Daddy's little girl, the child who believed Michael could do no wrong. Learning that her hero had feet of clay was almost as devastating as learning about the affair itself. But Sarah was stronger than I had realized. After the initial shock wore off, she became fiercely protective of me in a way that made my heart both break and swell with pride. She offered to drop out of school and get a job to help with expenses, an offer I immediately refused. Her education was the one thing I was determined to protect, no matter what else fell apart. We talked for hours that afternoon, sharing memories and trying to make sense of how our happy family had become this mess of lies and broken promises. Sarah remembered things I had forgotten or chosen to ignore. The way Michael had become secretive about his phone calls. The new clothes that appeared in his closet without explanation. The subtle changes in his behavior that we had both noticed but dismissed as stress from work. Looking back, the signs had been there for months, maybe longer. But when you love someone and trust them completely, you make excuses for the things that do not quite add up. You tell yourself that strange phone calls are work-related and new clothes are evidence that your spouse is taking better care of himself. You choose to believe the best because the alternative is too painful to consider. The private investigator Robert Walsh was a soft-spoken man in his 50s who had the patience of someone accustomed to dealing with people in crisis. He met with me twice a week to go over his findings, each session revealing new layers of Michael's deception. The secret bank account was just the beginning. Robert discovered that Michael had taken out a second mortgage on our house without my knowledge, forging my signature on documents that now put our home at risk of foreclosure. He had also opened 3 credit cards in both our names, running up over $30,000 in debt on everything from jewelry for Juanita to a weekend trip to Las Vegas that I had never heard about. Most devastating of all, Michael had cashed out his entire retirement account, the 401k that was supposed to fund our golden years together. The early withdrawal penalties and taxes had consumed almost half the money, and the rest had been spent on the apartment he shared with his mistress and the expensive lifestyle they had built together. The financial damage was staggering. Between the secret spending, the hidden debts, and the cashed-out retirement funds, Michael had essentially stolen over $200,000 from our marriage. We had gone from being financially secure to being on the brink of bankruptcy, and I had known nothing about it. Robert's investigation also revealed details about Juanita Martinez that made Michael's betrayal even more painful. She was not just some innocent woman who had fallen in love with a married man. She was smart, calculating, and fully aware that Michael was married. In fact, she had been pressuring him to divorce me so they could get married and she could claim half of our remaining assets. Text messages recovered from Michael's phone painted a picture of a woman who saw my husband as a meal ticket rather than a romantic partner. She complained when he could not give her more money, threatened to leave him when he hesitated about filing for divorce, and even suggested ways he could hide assets from me during the legal proceedings. Reading those messages felt like being stabbed repeatedly with a very sharp knife. Not only had my husband betrayed me, but he had been so blinded by infatuation that he could not see he was being manipulated by a woman who cared more about his bank account than his heart. The evidence Robert gathered filled 3 thick binders that Margaret Chen studied with the intensity of a scholar preparing for final exams. She explained that we had an unusually strong case for financial misconduct, but that did not guarantee we would recover all the stolen money. Much of it had already been spent and could not be retrieved. The best we could hope for was that the court would award me a larger share of our remaining assets and hold Michael personally responsible for the debts he had hidden. Margaret filed for divorce on a cold December morning when the first snow of the season was beginning to fall. The legal documents were served to Michael at his construction site, in front of his co-workers and his supervisor. It was not the most diplomatic way to handle the situation, but Margaret believed it sent a clear message that I was serious about fighting for what was rightfully mine. Michael called that evening, his voice a mixture of anger and desperation. He accused me of being vindictive, of trying to destroy his reputation and his career. He begged me to reconsider, promising he would end things with Juanita and go to counseling if I would just give him another chance. But it was too late for promises and second chances. The man I had loved and trusted for 22 years had systematically lied to me, stolen from me, and replaced me with another woman. The damage was too extensive, the betrayal too complete, for any amount of counseling to repair. The court proceedings began in February, on one of those bitter winter days when the wind cuts through your coat no matter how tightly you wrap it around yourself. The courthouse was an imposing granite building that smelled of floor wax and decades of human drama. Walking through those heavy wooden doors felt like entering a battlefield where the weapons were legal briefs and financial records instead of swords and shields. Judge Patricia Hawkins was a stern woman in her early 60s who had been presiding over family court for over 20 years. Her reputation was that of someone who had no patience for lies or financial shenanigans, which Margaret Chin assured me was exactly what we needed. Judge Hawkins had seen every possible variation of marital misconduct, and she was known for protecting the innocent spouse when assets had been dissipated. Michael sat at the defendant's table with his attorney, a nervous young man named David Foster who specialized in criminal defense rather than family law. It was clear that Michael had not been able to afford someone with Margaret's experience and expertise. He looked older than I remembered, his hair grayer and his face lined with stress. When our eyes met across the courtroom, I felt nothing but a hollow sadness for what we had once been. The first day of testimony focused on establishing the timeline of Michael's affair and the pattern of secret spending. Margaret methodically presented evidence of every hotel receipt, every restaurant charge, every transfer to Juanita Martinez's account. The numbers were staggering when laid out in chronological order, painting a picture of systematic financial deception that had gone on for almost 2 years. Michael's attorney tried to argue that the money had been spent on legitimate business expenses, but the evidence told a different story. Hotel rooms booked every Friday afternoon were clearly not business meetings. Jewelry purchases from Tiffany & Company were obviously not construction supplies. The $800 weekly transfers to a personal checking account held by an unmarried woman were definitely not professional fees. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source. Robert Walsh had tracked down several of Michael's co-workers who were willing to testify about what they had witnessed. The picture they painted was of a man who had been openly flaunting his affair, bringing Juanita to company parties and introducing her as his girlfriend while still wearing his wedding ring. Tom Bradley, Michael's supervisor for the past 8 years, testified that Michael had requested schedule changes so he could spend Friday afternoons with his girlfriend. He had also asked for advances on his salary multiple times, claiming he needed the money for family emergencies that apparently involved maintaining 2 households. Even more devastating was the testimony of Maria Santos, a secretary at the construction company who had become friends with Juanita Martinez. Maria revealed that Juanita had bragged about her relationship with a married man who was going to divorce his wife and marry her. Juanita had shown off expensive gifts and talked about the apartment Michael was paying for, describing me as an obstacle who would eventually be eliminated. Listening to this testimony felt surreal, like hearing about strangers rather than my own life. The woman being described was not the person I recognized as myself. In Juanita's version of events, I was a cold, unsupportive wife who did not appreciate her husband. Michael was an unappreciated hero who deserved better than what he had at home. The lies they had told themselves to justify their affair were almost as painful as the affair itself. Rather than acknowledging the wrongness of their actions, they had rewritten our entire marriage history to make themselves the victims and me the villain. It was a level of self-deception that made me wonder if I had ever really known my husband at all. On the second day of testimony, Margaret called me to the witness stand. Walking across that courtroom felt like the longest journey of my life, my legs shaky beneath my navy blue suit. I had practiced my testimony with Margaret dozens of times, but actually sitting in that witness chair with everyone staring at me was terrifying. Margaret guided me through the story of discovering the bank statements, the confrontation with Michael, and the gradual revelation of how extensively our assets had been hidden and spent. I tried to keep my voice steady as I described the financial damage, but when I talked about the trust that had been broken, tears began to flow despite my best efforts to remain composed. The hardest part was describing how Michael's actions had affected not just me, but our daughter Sarah. The college fund that we thought would cover her remaining 2 years of education was gone, spent on hotel rooms and expensive dinners for another woman. Sarah would now have to take out student loans or work multiple jobs to finish her degree, all because her father had prioritized his mistress over his family's future. Michael's attorney tried to cross-examine me, suggesting that I had been a neglectful wife who had driven my husband into another woman's arms. He asked about our sex life, our communication patterns, and whether I had made efforts to keep the romance alive in our marriage. The questions were invasive and humiliating, designed to make me share responsibility for Michael's choices. But Judge Hawkins shut down that line of questioning quickly, reminding David Foster that marital dissatisfaction did not justify financial fraud. Whatever problems existed in our marriage, she said firmly, they did not give Michael the right to steal marital assets and hide them from his spouse. The court was concerned with financial misconduct, not marriage counseling. The most dramatic moment of the trial came when Margaret presented the evidence of the forged signature on our second mortgage documents. Robert Walsh had hired a handwriting expert who testified that my signature on the loan papers had clearly been written by Michael. The mortgage company had been negligent in not verifying my identity, but Michael had committed what amounted to identity theft and fraud. This revelation seemed to shake Michael's composure for the first time. His face went white as the handwriting analysis was presented, and I could see him whispering urgently with his attorney. The forged mortgage put our family home at risk of foreclosure and added another layer of criminal behavior to what was already a devastating case of financial infidelity. Judge Hawkins called for a recess after that testimony, and I watched Michael hurry from the courtroom with his head down. Through the windows, I could see him on the courthouse steps, talking animatedly on his cell phone. I wondered if he was calling Juanita, trying to prepare her for what was coming next. When court resumed, Margaret dropped her biggest bombshell. She called Juanita Martinez to the witness stand. Juanita had been subpoenaed to testify about the money she had received and how it had been spent. She walked into that courtroom like she owned it, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in a year. Her long dark hair was perfectly styled, and her makeup was flawless. She was undeniably beautiful, and I could understand, on a purely physical level, why Michael had been attracted to her. But as soon as she began to testify, her character became clear. Under Margaret's questioning, Juanita admitted to receiving the weekly payments but claimed they were gifts, not support for their shared living expenses. She insisted that Michael had told her he was separated from me and planning to file for divorce immediately. Margaret presented evidence that contradicted every one of Juanita's claims. Bank records showed that the money was being used to pay rent, utilities, and household expenses for their shared apartment. Text messages revealed that Juanita had known Michael was still living with me and had pressured him to hide their relationship. Most damaging of all were recorded phone calls in which Juanita had coached Michael on how to hide assets and lie to me about their relationship. Judge Hawkins asked Juanita directly whether she had known that Michael was married and living with his wife throughout their entire relationship. For several long seconds, Juanita sat silent, clearly realizing that her previous testimony had been contradicted by documentary evidence. Finally, she admitted that yes, she had known Michael was married, but she claimed she thought our marriage was already over. The cross-examination revealed Juanita to be exactly what Robert Walsh's investigation had suggested, a calculating woman who had targeted a married man for financial gain. She had encouraged Michael to hide money from me, had threatened to leave him when he could not provide more expensive gifts, and had even researched divorce laws to determine how much money she could expect to receive if Michael left me for her. Most shocking of all was the revelation that Juanita had been pressuring Michael to take out additional loans against our house so they could buy a condo together. She had found a property she wanted and had been demanding that Michael find a way to finance it, even if it meant forging more documents or lying to more banks. By the time Juanita left the witness stand, it was clear that she was not just a woman who had fallen in love with a married man. She was a predator who had systematically manipulated Michael into betraying his family for her financial benefit. The $800 per week had been just the beginning of what she expected to extract from our marriage. Michael took the stand on the third day of testimony, and watching him try to explain his actions was one of the most painful experiences of my life. This was the man I had loved for over 2 decades, the father of my child, the person I had trusted with my heart and my future. But the man in that witness chair was a stranger, someone who had made choices I could never have imagined. His testimony was a combination of self-pity and blame-shifting that made me cringe with second-hand embarrassment. He claimed that our marriage had been loveless for years, that I had been cold and unaffectionate, that he had felt unappreciated and taken for granted. According to Michael, the affair was not about sex or romance but about finding someone who valued him and made him feel important. Margaret's cross-examination was methodical and devastating. She presented evidence that contradicted every claim Michael made about our marriage being troubled. Photos from family vacations, anniversary cards I had written, emails between us that showed normal affection and communication. She demonstrated that our marriage had been happy and functional right up until the moment Michael decided to start his secret relationship. More importantly, Margaret forced Michael to acknowledge the extent of his financial deception. Under oath, he had to admit to every forged signature, every hidden bank account, every lie he had told to cover his tracks. The man who had once been my rock, my security, my partner in building a life together, was revealed to be a fraud who had systematically stolen from his own family. The worst moment came when Margaret asked Michael to look directly at me and explain why he thought it was acceptable to risk our daughter's education funding to pay for his girlfriend's apartment. Michael could not do it. He looked down at his hands, mumbled an incoherent apology, and admitted that he had made terrible choices that he could not justify. Judge Hawkins delivered her verdict on a bright March morning when the first signs of spring were beginning to appear in the courthouse garden. The courtroom was packed with family members, friends, and legal observers who had followed the case through 3 days of dramatic testimony. The judge's words were clear and unforgiving. Michael had committed extensive financial misconduct that rose to the level of fraud and theft. He had systematically hidden assets, forged legal documents, and depleted marital resources for his personal benefit. The damage to our family's financial security was so severe that it justified extraordinary remedies. Judge Hawkins awarded me 75% of all remaining marital assets, including our house, our cars, and what little money was left in our accounts. Michael was ordered to pay me spousal support for 10 years and to cover Sarah's remaining college expenses. Most importantly, he was held personally responsible for all the debt he had hidden, including the second mortgage and the credit card balances. The judgment also included an order requiring Michael to make restitution for the money he had dissipated, though Judge Hawkins acknowledged that much of it could never be recovered. The court could not force him to pay back money that had already been spent on hotel rooms and expensive dinners, but it could ensure that he bore the financial consequences of his choices. Walking out of that courthouse on the day of the final judgment felt like emerging from a tunnel into sunlight. The March air was crisp and clean, carrying the promise of spring after a winter that had felt endless. Margaret Chen walked beside me, her briefcase heavy with the legal documents that had restored some measure of justice to my shattered world. The media attention had been unexpected but not unwelcome. Our case had become something of a local sensation, a cautionary tale about financial infidelity that resonated with anyone who had ever trusted a spouse with their financial future. Several reporters waited on the courthouse steps, their cameras and microphones ready to capture my reaction to the verdict. I kept my statement brief and dignified, thanking Judge Hawkins for her careful consideration of the evidence and expressing hope that our case would encourage other victims of financial infidelity to seek justice. I did not mention Michael by name or speak about my personal feelings. Some wounds are too deep and too private to share with strangers, no matter how sympathetic they might be. The practical implications of the judgment were both liberating and daunting. I would get to keep our house, but I would also be responsible for all its expenses on a teacher's salary. The spousal support would help, but it could not replace the financial security that 22 years of careful saving had provided. At 51 years old, I was essentially starting over, rebuilding a life that had been systematically destroyed by the person I had trusted most. Sarah came home from college that weekend to help me begin the process of reclaiming our house and our lives. The first step was changing all the locks, a symbolic gesture that felt more significant than it probably should have. The sound of the new deadbolt sliding into place was the sound of safety being restored, of boundaries being re-established. We spent the next several days going through the house room by room, removing all traces of Michael's presence. His clothes, his tools, his books, even the coffee mug he had used every morning for 15 years. Everything went into boxes that were loaded into his pickup truck and delivered to the apartment he shared with Juanita Martinez. The hardest items to dispose of were the photographs. 22 years of marriage generates a lot of pictures, and many of them showed genuinely happy moments that had meant something to me at the time. But looking at those images now, knowing what I know about the lies and deceptions that had been running parallel to our apparent happiness, made them feel contaminated. Sarah suggested we keep some photos for historical purposes, carefully cutting Michael out of family pictures so we could preserve memories of vacations and celebrations without preserving his image. It was tedious work, but it felt therapeutic to literally edit him out of our history. The wall of family photos in our hallway became a gallery of Sarah and me, grandmother and aunts and cousins, a complete record of our lives with the central figure removed. The financial rebuilding was more complex than the emotional healing. Margaret Chen referred me to a financial planner who specialized in helping people recover from major economic setbacks. Janet Morrison was a woman in her 60s who radiated the kind of calm competence that comes from decades of helping people navigate financial crises. Janet's assessment of my situation was sobering but not hopeless. The house was my biggest asset but also my biggest expense. Property taxes, insurance, utilities, and maintenance would consume a significant portion of my income. I could sell it and downsize to something more affordable, or I could take in a boarder to help with expenses. The choice was entirely mine, but it had to be made soon. I chose to keep the house, at least for now. It was Sarah's childhood home, the place where we had built our life together, and I was not ready to let Michael's betrayal force me out of the only security I had left. A graduate student from the local university moved into our guest room in April, providing enough rental income to make the mortgage payments manageable. The spousal support payments arrived on schedule each month, deposited automatically into my new bank account. 10 years seemed like a long time to be financially dependent on someone who had already proven himself untrustworthy, but it was better than nothing. Margaret had warned me that enforcing the judgment might be difficult if Michael decided to hide his income or declare bankruptcy, but so far he had complied with the court's orders. Sarah finished her junior year with a 3.8 grade point average, despite everything that had happened to our family. She had taken a part-time job at the campus library to help with expenses, and she planned to apply for additional scholarships for her senior year. Watching her handle adversity with such grace and determination made me proud of the young woman she had become. The divorce was finalized in June, on a day so beautiful it seemed inappropriate for ending a marriage. The paperwork was handled by mail, without ceremony or drama. 22 years of legal partnership dissolved with the stroke of a judge's pen, reducing decades of shared dreams and mutual support to a stack of official documents. I kept my married name, not out of any lingering attachment to Michael but because changing it would have been one more administrative burden in a life that had already been disrupted enough. Besides, I had been Jennifer Harrison longer than I had been Jennifer Mitchell. The name was mine now, regardless of where it had come from originally. The first year of single life was an adjustment that challenged every assumption I had made about my future. Simple things like going to movies alone or eating dinner by myself required conscious effort and deliberate choice. I had been part of a couple for so long that being an individual felt foreign and sometimes frightening. But there were unexpected benefits to solitude that I had not anticipated. I could watch whatever television shows I wanted without negotiating with someone else's preferences. I could decorate the house according to my own taste without considering how it might affect a partner. I could make financial decisions based solely on my own needs and priorities. Most importantly, I could trust my own perceptions without second-guessing myself or wondering what secrets were being kept from me. The hypervigilance that had characterized the final months of my marriage began to fade, replaced by a sense of security that came from knowing exactly where I stood financially and emotionally. The anniversary of discovering those first bank statements passed quietly in October, marked only by my private recognition of how much had changed in 12 months. I was stronger than I had been a year ago, more self-reliant and more confident in my ability to handle whatever challenges life might present. Michael and Juanita had moved to another state shortly after the divorce was finalized, probably to escape the social embarrassment of their local notoriety. I heard occasional updates through mutual acquaintances, but their new life was no longer my concern. They had made their choices and would live with the consequences, just as I was living with mine. The house felt different now, lighter somehow despite being occupied by the same furniture and decorated with the same artwork. It was my space now, arranged according to my preferences and filled with only the people I chose to invite into it. Sarah's bedroom was preserved exactly as she had left it for college, a shrine to her childhood that I enjoyed maintaining. My teaching career took on new significance as my primary source of identity and income. The stability of a steady job with good benefits became precious in a way it had never been when I thought I had a partner to share financial responsibilities. My students became more important to me, their daily dramas and small victories providing a sense of purpose that went beyond just earning a paycheck. The second year brought new challenges and new growth. Sarah graduated from college with honors and found a good job in marketing that allowed her to be financially independent. Watching her walk across that stage to receive her diploma was one of the proudest moments of my life, made more meaningful by the knowledge that we had preserved her education despite Michael's attempt to steal her future. I began dating again, tentatively at first, then with more confidence as I rediscovered what it meant to be valued and appreciated by someone who was not living a double life. The trust issues were significant, and probably always would be, but I was learning to distinguish between reasonable caution and paranoid suspicion. The financial recovery continued steadily, helped by conservative investments and careful budgeting. I would never be as well off as I had been before Michael's betrayal, but I was building a new kind of security based on my own efforts and decisions. The money I saved belonged only to me, held in accounts that only I could access, protected by passwords that only I knew. 3 years after the divorce, I received an unexpected phone call from Margaret Chin. Michael's spousal support payments had stopped, and her attempts to contact him had been unsuccessful. Apparently, he and Juanita had declared bankruptcy and disappeared, leaving no forwarding address and no assets that could be seized to satisfy the court judgment. The news was disappointing but not devastating. I had been preparing for this possibility since the day the support order was issued, building my life around my teacher's salary rather than depending on payments from someone who had already proven himself unreliable. The lost income would require some adjustments, but it would not destroy the financial stability I had worked so hard to rebuild. In a strange way, Michael's disappearance provided a kind of closure that the divorce papers had not. He was truly gone now, not just from my daily life but from my financial future as well. Whatever happened to me from this point forward would be entirely my own responsibility and my own achievement. For years after that October morning when I first opened a bank statement addressed to my husband, I was sitting in my kitchen on another crisp autumn day, grading papers and planning lessons for the week ahead. The maple tree outside my window was dropping its golden leaves just as it had 4 years ago, but everything else about my life had changed completely. The woman who had discovered those bank statements had been naive and trusting, dependent on someone else for her sense of security and self-worth. The woman sitting at this same kitchen table 4 years later was stronger, wiser, and more self-reliant. She had survived betrayal, divorce, financial ruin, and the complete reconstruction of her adult identity. My phone rang as I was finishing the last set of math tests, and Sarah's voice filled the kitchen with excitement about her new promotion and her plans to buy her first house. Listening to her describe her career goals and her financial strategies, I realized that one of the most important things to come out of our family's crisis was Sarah's early education in self-reliance and financial responsibility. She would never be as vulnerable as I had been because she had seen firsthand what could happen when you trusted someone else completely with your financial future. The lessons she had learned from watching our family fall apart and rebuild itself would serve her well throughout her adult life. As the sun set that October evening, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that reminded me why I had always loved this season, I felt something I had not experienced in years. Peace. Not the fragile peace of someone who was pretending everything was fine, but the deep contentment of someone who had faced the worst and survived it. The bank records that Judge Hawkins had examined so carefully were now stored in a file cabinet in my home office, evidence of a chapter of my life that was definitively closed. They served as a reminder of how much damage financial infidelity could do to a family, but also as proof that such damage could be survived and overcome. My story had become part of the legal record, a cautionary tale that Margaret Chen sometimes referenced when advising other clients facing similar betrayals. The case had established important precedents about financial misconduct in marriage, contributing to legal protections that would help other wives and husbands who found themselves in similar situations. But more than its legal significance, my experience had taught me something valuable about resilience and self-reliance. The security I had once thought came from being married to someone who promised to take care of me actually came from within myself, from my own ability to adapt and survive and rebuild when everything familiar was stripped away. The house was quiet now except for the sound of the old radiator clicking as it warmed against the evening chill. My boarder was studying in her room upstairs, Sarah was settled in her own apartment across town, and I was exactly where I belonged. In my own space, on my own terms, with my own money safely deposited in accounts that only I could access. 4 years ago, I had thought my life was over when I discovered my husband's betrayal. Tonight, I knew it had actually just begun.